Hello, and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. Spoilers abound in this video for a 10-year-old movie about a 32-year-old game. Do you remember that there was a Warcraft movie back in 2016? I mean, I did because I've literally got it on my shelf, but I could certainly forgive you for forgetting about it. The film released just a few months before Legion arrived, but instead, naturally, covered the story surrounding Warcraft 1. And if you watched my Warcraft 1 video, you know there wasn't a lot of story in its initial iteration. Of course, that period of time would later get expanded on with novels and the like, so there was stuff to draw upon. The movie was directed by Duncan Jones, written by him and Charles Leavitt, and produced by Legendary Pictures, Atlas Entertainment, and Blizzard itself. Universal distributed it. Fascinatingly, despite failing to break even financially when promotional costs were factored in, it was actually the highest grossing film based on a video game until Mario in 2023, with a gross of $439 million. It was pretty critically panned and has a score of 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. I watched it in theaters at the time and distinctly remember describing it as a very B+ movie. I found, as many others at the time, that the orc performances were particularly strong, and that the humans felt perhaps a bit stiff. Yes, the irony that the characters coded in CGI felt more real was not lost on us. Anyway, I decided to finally rewatch the film almost a decade later to refresh myself on it for this review, and to see if my opinion would change at all. And it really didn't. I still found it to be a very B+ movie. I think general audiences probably were always going to be more critical of it, but as a Warcraft fan, I thought it was quite an enjoyable experience that would have massively benefited from even a few reconsiderations. The film does a fairly good job of depicting the Horde and Alliance in a very even split. On the Horde side, our main character is Durotan, portrayed by Toby Kebbell, who brings his clan through the Dark Portal with the rest of the Horde to escape their dying world, and to find a habitable one. Throughout the film, he bears witness to the fell magic Gul'dan wields and wrestles with how to best protect his people, including his newborn son, Goel, even going so far as to meet with the humans to coordinate a way to kill the orc warlock. He ultimately perishes in Mak-Gorah against Gul'dan. Orgrim Doomhammer, portrayed by Robert Kaczynski, also receives a fair deal of focus, having been rewritten to be a member of the Frostwolves to more succinctly explain his close relationship with Durotan. He respects his chieftain and wishes the best for him and his family, but in a moment of weakness and aversion to working with humans, betrays him by revealing the meeting with humans to Blackhand, completely upending the plan. This results in Durotan being imprisoned, Draka and Goel having to flee, and many of the Frostwolves being slain. Doomhammer then repents and aids Durotan. By the end of the film, he's the most prominent orc that still has the general favor of the majority of the Horde, making it understandable how he succeeded Blackhand as war chief. Speaking of Blackhand, portrayed by Clancy Brown, he is present and serves as war chief throughout the film, though his authority generally feels secondary to that of Gul'dan. He resists use of the Fel, but is ultimately infused with it by Gul'dan, and soon after perishes in Mak-Gorah against Lothar. Gul'dan, portrayed by Daniel Wu, serves as the film's main antagonist, strong-arming the Horde throughout until he finally loses favor by cheating in his Mak-Gorah against Durotan by using Fel magic. It is hilariously relevant that it was portrayed this way, as WoD sparked a huge conversation about whether or not Thrall had cheated in his Mak-Gorah against Garrosh by invoking the elements. To my knowledge, Thrall did not cheat because there is no restriction against magic in the game universe. The film has a different set of rules, but it certainly didn't help Thrall's portrayal. On the human side, our focal character is Anduin Lothar, commander of the Stormwind Army, portrayed by Travis Fimmel. He is the one leading the effort to repel the orcish invaders. He is naturally skeptical of anyone who endangers himself, the king, or the world. In the end, he helps in thwarting Medivh and defeats Blackhand, a feat given to Doomhammer in the Warcraft canon. Aiding him throughout the film is a young Khadgar, portrayed by Ben Schnetzer, a plucky young mage who in the film is actually supposed to be Medivh's successor appointed by the Kirin Tor, though he renounces that position. He's quite capable, if a bit blundering, and you can see the precursor of the aged Khadgar we're used to within WoW. It is ultimately his actions which are most directly responsible for killing the possessed Medivh. Medivh is portrayed by Ben Foster, and of course serves as the enigmatic guardian who's supposed to protect the world, and does do so, but spends the majority of his time cloistered within Karazhan. As in the canon, it's discovered that he's been at times possessed by a demonic force, although the movie never states it to be Sargeras. His actions in tandem with Gul'dan's are indeed what brought the orcs to Azeroth, and he has to be put down. Though, in the end, he does manage to save many of the captured humans and insists he always wanted to protect the world, which I feel is actually quite true to his original character. King Lane Wrynn, portrayed by Dominic Cooper, is of course the King of Stormwind, but also close friends with Lothar and Medivh. He is among the most diplomatic of the humans, willing to cooperate with Garona and to collaborate with Durotan. In the end, when the last of the humans are surrounded by orc forces, he orders Garona to kill him to save herself, and hopefully help bring about peace. This is a notable change from the canon, where despite being his friend, Garona was forced to kill him by Gul'dan's mental shackles on her, and I find this change to have actually been a very good idea. It helps cement Lane as a respectable king, while adding more depth to Garona's remorse over the action, since, yeah, he was gonna die either way, but she still had to personally commit to the act. And the character who most bridges the gap between the two sides of the story is Garona Half-Orcan, portrayed by Paula Patton. Perhaps to better align with that split, she was made to be half-human instead of half-Draenei. She is still shunned by the bulk of Orc society, and kept around by Gul'dan mostly for her translation skills. She is still loyal in many ways to Orc culture, respecting Durotan, and even asking if he would accept her into the Frostwolves. Yet she is more open to the ways of human culture, gradually warming up to them as they show her kindness and work together in battle. She forms strong bonds with most of them, making it all the more tragic when she has to kill Lane and in doing so antagonizes Lothar. We also get cameos or minor appearances from other major characters like Magni, Antonidas, Moros, Varian, Grom, Kargath, and Kilrog. As for the acting and general depiction, as I mentioned earlier, audiences tended to like how the orcs were handled, but not so much the humans. I generally share that point of view. Durotan and Doomhammer were both phenomenal performances, and I could really feel their internal struggles as well as their camaraderie. Blackhand, Gul'dan, and Draka were pretty much what I expected them to be. On the human side, I actually really liked how Medivh was handled. He definitely gave off tortured soul vibes, wanting to do what's best for his friends and his world, but ultimately suffering from a curse he was saddled with and a self-isolating tendency that did himself no favors. Honestly, his performance here probably helped inform my overall impression of the character. Khadgar was depicted well enough, though I did find myself a bit distracted by how many Will Wheaton vibes he was putting out. Admittedly, a lot of that is down to a physical resemblance. Lothar was serviceable. Nothing egregiously bad, but stuff like the drama with his son made it feel like they were trying too hard to validate his main character status. He was always the character I cared about least on the screen. Except when Lane was on the screen. I'm sorry, I don't know if it was the actor or how he was directed, but he came across as overly flat and apathetic in far too many of his scenes. I get that he was supposed to be diplomatic, but the overall result was that he was completely forgettable. Lastly, I really enjoyed how Garona was handled. She really did feel like a character with a unique ability to exist in multiple worlds, but struggling to find her true place in either of those worlds. She was quite likable, delightfully crass at times, and easily the character I most rooted for. Well, as much as you can root for a character you already know the story of. I certainly found her more interesting than what we saw of her in the canon. Mostly. We'll get to the weird parts in a moment. The movie did make some considerable changes, many of which I mentioned, but honestly, most of them are completely fine. Like, sure, Dalaran is already floating, but other than one mission in Warcraft 3 that wouldn't really need to be depicted in the film universe anyway, there's no reason it needed to be grounded back then. Minor stuff like that. There were, however, a few changes that I found truly bizarre. Most notable among these was the decision to make Medivh be Garona's father instead of her love interest. It's highly implied in the film itself that he visited Draenor at one point and had an orc mate, and that Garona was the result of this. And the official novelization of the movie states the connection outright. This change is fine in a vacuum, but feels really, really weird when you know their canon relationship. This may have been done to clear the way for Garona having a romantic relationship with Lothar instead. There are a few scenes where their bodies and lips are suspiciously close to one another, including a scene where Lothar is mourning his recently slain son and is coping by getting drunk. I don't know, feels kinda like icky placement to me. And if you think I'm reading into it too much, there's an extended version of the scene where Lothar has Garona beat him up a bit, and then they wind up horizontal on the bar with her legs parting. One point that I think the movie suffered from was trying to introduce too much. We got a scene in Ironforge and a scene in Dalaran that do little to enhance the script. The Dalaran one is especially weird because Khadgar shows up, is scolded by Antonidas, and then enters a strange cube where he speaks to Aladi, portrayed by Glenn Close. This was completely unnecessary. Like Aladi, the first Guardian, is an extremely minor footnote in the lore, and did not need to be included here. I thought she was going to be Egwene the first time I saw images of this, and it doesn't add anything whatsoever to the plot. Also, for some reason, Khadgar is saddled with the proverb, "From light comes darkness, and from darkness, light," which doesn't actually mean anything and just sounds super generic, cliche, and bad. We're also introduced to Lane's wife, Taria, who happens to also be Lothar's sister, just to make sure everybody knows each other better, I suppose. She's fine as a minor character and does serve her purpose well. What I'm not necessarily a fan of was choosing to give Lothar a son named Callan, who mostly just serves to get killed off and send Lothar into an emotional spiral. It wasn't a terrible plot point, but it's screen time that could have been better utilized elsewhere. We also waste a solid minute at the start of the film having a generic human soldier and an orc grunt clash. And here's where I throw in random things I liked or found funny, which I don't have any other good spots to talk about them in. The movie does a phenomenal job of subtle physical humor, things like Medivh letting go of his staff and just assuming Khadgar will catch it. I was surprised by how often tiny moments like this made me snicker. Probably my favorite bit of directing in the whole thing occurs during the meeting between Durotan and the humans. Garona is translating, and at the start, the Orcish lines are, well, Orcish, and impossible to understand without her help. But when asked why Durotan is here if he doesn't plan to leave Azeroth, the scene shifts to Durotan's speech being understandable to the audience, as he says, "To save my people." It really cleverly takes advantage of what should be a filmmaking disadvantage and helps punctuate the weight of that line in particular. And there were 3 deleted scenes I wanted to highlight. Sadly, one was where Metzen makes his cameo. Another is back on Draenor, where Gromash embraces the Fel in his body, to which Orgrim quips, "Yeah, but you're green now." It was funny. And lastly, an extended cut of the scene where Lane tries to rally the rest of the Alliance to aid Stormwind. After a comment from one of the High Elves, a human mutters the slur, "Floppy-eared freak." Except it wasn't freak, you know what word it was. It made me chuckle, but also just felt so out of place and was clearly where they tried to use their one F-bomb, only to cut it anyway. Okay, back to major stuff. If we haven't made it clear by this point, I think the main story and the film's depiction of it is pretty solid. We've got characters with complex motivations, forced to make difficult decisions, and almost everyone other than Gul'dan and maybe Blackhand can be empathized with. I know Lothar is treated as the main character, but I think it works even better if you watch the film thinking of Garona as the main character. She is, after all, the one that bridges the gap, and who has the most interesting story to tell here. Considering the foundational material Jones was working with here, it all could have been far, far worse. And I don't really agree with the claims that they should have just made a Warcraft 3 movie right out of the gate. Get over your Arthas obsession, people. There are other interesting parts of the lore. I would have loved to see the movies continue, but alas, 'twas not meant to be. I absolutely agree that it would probably work better as a Netflix-style series like The Witcher. Even better if it could be animated like Arcane was for League of Legends. I know they've mentioned talks of another stab at a movie or something, so who knows what'll happen. Overall, the 2016 Warcraft film was quite enjoyable. I have my nitpicks about it, and it's definitely a bit rough around the edges. Certainly not what I would call a cinematic masterpiece, but I do think it's given a worse rap than it deserves, and absolutely maintain my stance that it's a B+ film. If you're bored and it's on Netflix or you have other means to watch it, I absolutely think it's worth 2 hours of your time. For this week's drawing, I decided to go with Garona, as to me, she was the star of the show. I did have some trouble deciding just how to depict Garona. You know, how much did I want to draw from the movie and how much from other media. Not that she's given much of an official look in other media anyways. She is fairly consistently depicted with the boar tails, but I always found those hard to take seriously, so I decided to draw her hair more how it's depicted in the movie. And the same is true of her armor. And to just grab the daggers from some random piece of official art I found. The dagger from the movie looked kind of stupid, and it felt a bit insensitive to use the Kingslayers for her anyway, given how much emotional baggage is attached to them. On a bit of a side note, I remember seeing this image of Garona very early on in my Warcraft days, and I only discovered much later that this was from the development of Warcraft 3, which obviously she never actually made it into. And I don't really think there was much of a place for her in Reign of Chaos anyway, though she could have very easily been slotted into the Frozen Throne Orc campaign, if they had ever decided to make an Orc rogue hero unit. Still, if she was meant for Reign of Chaos, it's interesting to ponder the implications indications of that. We don't really see her in WoW until Cataclysm anyway, so her story could have taken a very different turn. And I drew her in the Blasted Lands just cause, you know, Dark Portal, Warcraft 1, she went through it. I don't know where else I was gonna draw her. I do like how the background turned out here, especially the Dark Portal itself, but I wasn't super satisfied with how Garona turned out. In fact, I think the only orc I've drawn that looked good was Sourfang, and that was the one I accidentally sort of traced. So yeah, need to work on my orc game. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye-bye!